October 17, 1872, mist-laden valley. The grand hallway glows with dozens of beeswax candles, their golden light dancing across mahogany walls adorned with oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors. Master Cornelius Whitmore adjusts his silk cravat in the gilded mirror, preparing for the Christmas Eve gala, where Charleston's finest will toast another prosperous year of cotton and commerce. The sweet scent of melting wax mingles with expensive tobacco and aged brandy. What he doesn't know is that in the servants' quarters below, Samuel has been collecting every candle stub, every drop of lamp oil, every flammable fragment from months of silent preparation. But tonight, these remnants of luxury won't illuminate another evening of celebration. They will consume it. Within the hour, the same flames that lit Whitmore's prideful display would devour everything he held sacred. And it all began with a brand burned into flesh, a mother torn away, a son who learned that fire could be both destroyer and liberator. Samuel moves through the shadows with practiced silence, but his hands shake not from fear, from anticipation. Above, Whitmore straightens his gold pocket watch, counting down to midnight. Below, Samuel counts down to justice. This is the story of Samuel Turner, the man who turned his master's own light into an inferno of reckoning and made a monument to cruelty burn until only ashes of truth remained. But before we witness how Samuel's careful planning erupted into flames that would be seen for miles, if you're ready for stories where justice burns brighter than oppression, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, revenge, and the price of freedom. Hit subscribe now, because you're about to see how one man's fury became a fire that consumed an empire. Samuel's life had been a study in pain and endurance. Born into servitude in the southern fields, he had been handed from overseer to master with little regard for the boy's spirit. By the time he arrived at Blackthorn Manor, his body was already a map of scars and bruises, each marking a chapter of suffering. The manor's grand halls, with their vaulted ceilings and flickering chandeliers, seemed to mock him with opulence. The walls themselves whispered secrets of oppression, echoing with the laughter of the unrepentant lord. Yet it was within these walls that Samuel's mind sharpened, his patience hardened. Observing the master, noting habits, cataloging weaknesses, each act a silent rehearsal of the eventual storm. He watched as Lord Blackthorn entertained guests with cruel jests, punishing the meek, delighting in the fear of those who dared to defy him. Samuel memorized every step, every flick of the wrist, every candle's shadow, for these were the tools of his future retribution. Night after night he walked the corridors, the flickering candlelight casting a spectral glow on his silent figure, as if the very shadows conspired with him. And in the quiet moments he whispered his own mantras, words of fire and reckoning that no one else would hear. Each whisper reinforced his resolve. Each observation laid the groundwork for a single, incandescent night. In the flicker of a candle, he could see not just the present cruelty, but the future collapse of the tyrant before him. He had become the embodiment of patience and wrath intertwined, a vessel for the coming Inferno. The manor itself seemed unaware, like a sleeping beast, of the vengeance growing in its midst. Samuel's existence had been a slow, methodical preparation for justice, and justice was patient, silent, and inevitable. Blackthorn's cruelty was a symphony of terror. He wielded his authority with the precision of a conductor, orchestrating fear in every room, in every hall. Slaves bent under his gaze, servants flinched at his word, and visitors, if perceptive, saw the tremor behind the elegance. Samuel recalled the day he had witnessed Blackthorn strike his own nephew for a minor insult, a crack of the whip, the boy's scream, the lord's cruel laughter. Such moments were etched into Samuel's memory like scars on stone. But in these memories also lay strategy. The tyrant's patterns became clear, predictable in his arrogance, slow in complacency, and prone to underestimating those he deemed beneath him. Samuel cataloged every indulgence, every predictable route, every room left unguarded after dark. Each detail mattered, for it would be the foundation of fire, both literal and symbolic. Even the manor's guards were pawns in his vision, blinded by fear or greed, their loyalty as brittle as dried leaves. The kitchen became his classroom, the wine cellar his archive of tools, and in the small hours before midnight, he rehearsed silently, feeling the surge of something heavier than fear: destiny. With each suppressed heartbeat, Samuel felt the weight of history pressing against his shoulders. It was a dark, sacred weight, a promise that no cruelty could erase. He knew that one night would define not just him, but the memory of Blackthorn, and the tale of that night would travel long after the candlelight faded. The manor at night was a labyrinth of shadows and whispered secrets. Candle flames danced against ornate wallpaper, reflecting gold and red, as if the walls themselves were aflame with suppressed rage. Samuel knew every hidden passage, every creaking floorboard, and every locked door, tools in his arsenal. He had memorized the master's habits, the nightly ritual of inspecting ledgers, the habit of lingering in the study until the last candle guttered. These predictable actions became the map upon which his plan would unfold. And yet, in the quiet corners, he did not merely plan murder, he crafted symbolism. Fire, he decided, would not only destroy Blackthorn, but also illuminate the centuries of oppression he represented. Each wick, each spilled oil, each fragile candle would be an instrument of poetic justice. Samuel's body tensed with anticipation as he imagined the moment, the hiss of flame meeting timber, the smell of smoke curling toward the heavens, the tyrant's eyes wide with disbelief. His pulse was a drum of inevitability, a rhythm that demanded action, yet patience remained his ally. He would not rush, for impatience would ruin the purity of this reckoning. Shadows wrapped around him like a cloak, and he moved as if the darkness itself were breathing with him. In every corridor, he left only silence, a quiet anticipation that would magnify the terror when fire and vengeance intertwined. History would not forget this night. The manor at night was a labyrinth of shadows and whispered secrets. Candle flames danced against ornate wallpaper, reflecting gold and red, as if the walls themselves were aflame with suppressed rage. Samuel knew every hidden passage, every creaking floorboard, and every locked door, tools in his arsenal. He had memorized the master's habits, the nightly ritual of inspecting ledgers, the habit of lingering in the study until the last candle guttered. These predictable actions became the map upon which his plan would unfold. And yet, in the quiet corners, he did not merely plan murder, he crafted symbolism. Fire, he decided, would not only destroy Blackthorn, but also illuminate the centuries of oppression he represented. Each wick, each spilled oil, each fragile candle would be an instrument of poetic justice. Samuel's body tensed with anticipation as he imagined the moment, the hiss of flame meeting timber, the smell of smoke curling toward the heavens, the tyrant's eyes wide with disbelief. His pulse was a drum of inevitability, a rhythm that demanded action, yet patience remained his ally. He would not rush, for impatience would ruin the purity of this reckoning. Shadows wrapped around him like a cloak, and he moved as if the darkness itself were breathing with him. In every corridor, he left only silence, a quiet anticipation that would magnify the terror when fire and vengeance intertwined. History would not forget this night. Lord Blackthorn's arrogance made him oblivious to the undercurrents of the night. In his private chambers, he traced the folds of an embroidered robe, humming a tune that had comforted him in countless nights of cruelty. Each note of his melody was a reminder of power, a rhythm Samuel had studied for weeks. The master's face, illuminated by the dancing candlelight, revealed no hint of the terror to come. Yet every line of that face betrayed indulgence and hubris. He was a man who believed himself untouchable, a god in his gilded cage, blind to the storm that brewed beneath his feet. Samuel, watching from shadowed corridors, allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile, born not of malice alone, but of inevitability. He had catalogued every habit, every distraction, and every human weakness. The tyrant's ego was a tinderbox, ready to ignite with a single spark. Servants scurried in the hallways, hushed voices blending with the crackle of distant candle flames. Samuel's preparation had required meticulous timing. doors barred at precise moments, flammable oils in secret places, and escape routes marked by silence. In his mind, he imagined the tableau he would create: fire licking across velvet drapes, smoke curling through ornate cornices, blackthorn stumbling amidst the blaze, disbelief in his eyes. Yet even as he moved closer, the weight of his plan did not crush him. It steadied him. He felt the pulse of history in his veins, the rhythm of vengeance echoing the suffering of countless oppressed souls. Every shadow seemed to acknowledge him, bending in silent reverence, guiding him to the moment of ignition. And though the master remained ignorant, the air itself seemed to thrum with expectation, as if the house had conspired with its prisoner to deliver judgment. Samuel paused once more, fingertips brushing against polished wood, feeling the latent warmth of Asia. 100 years of tyranny. Tonight, the walls would witness not just a man's wrath, but a reckoning carved into legend. The candlelight danced more wildly now, as though impatient, reflecting the fiery inevitability that Samuel would unleash. The air, heavy with oil and anticipation, seemed to lean toward the inevitable conflagration, and in the shadows, the future whispered his name. The manor seemed to breathe with Samuel's anticipation. Every creak of wood underfoot, every whisper of wind against the shutters, became a herald of the approaching inferno. He paused outside the master's private chamber, listening to Blackthorn's low, arrogant laughter echoing faintly from within. The tyrant remained blissfully unaware, preoccupied with a ledger detailing wealth stolen from those too weak to defend themselves. Samuel's fingers grazed the polished doorframe, memorizing the subtle grooves, the faint scratches that marked the years of his silent presence in this house. With every observation, the narrative of vengeance unfolded perfectly in his mind. The fire would start small, a single spark igniting the chaos, and from that spark, the flames would rise, devouring both wood and arrogance alike. Each candle he had carefully positioned would serve as a vector of destruction, guiding the blaze to its inevitable climax. He imagined Blackthorn's eyes widening, disbelief and terror mingling as the fire consumed the room around him. And yet, even in the face of such destruction, Samuel felt no malice beyond justice. This was not a killing born of whimsy, but of necessity, a purging of the darkness that had festered unchecked for decades. In the quiet of the hall, he whispered the names of the oppressed, letting their memory fortify his resolve. Every step, every flick of an oil-soaked rag was a tribute to those who had suffered under tyranny, a calculated strike that would echo in history. As he moved, shadows wrapped around him like allies, silent witnesses to the orchestration of vengeance. The manor itself seemed to hum with expectation, aware that its walls were about to witness a legend. Samuel's pulse was steady, deliberate, each beat counting down to the ignition of both fire and myth. The night was ready, only he could summon it into existence, turning decades of torment into a blaze that would never be forgotten. Every corridor Samuel traversed seemed laden with history, the scent of dust and oil mingling in the cool night air. He paused at the threshold of the grand dining hall, where chandeliers hung heavy with wax and crystal, reflecting candlelight like the eyes of 1,000 silent witnesses. The echo of past cruelties reverberated off the marble floors. Servants punished, whispers silenced, bones bowed under unyielding authority. Samuel felt the weight of these memories, not as chains, but as fuel. Each step forward was a drumbeat, each careful placement of oil a note in the symphony of vengeance he had composed over years. The flicker of candle flames cast long, quivering shadows that seemed to anticipate the coming fire. Stretching like skeletal hands toward the master's chambers, he imagined the blaze consuming tapestries, manuscripts, and the symbols of arrogance that Blackthorn so cherished. In the hallways, the shadows deepened, embracing him, guiding him with an almost sentient awareness of his mission. Samuel's breath was measured, his mind sharp, cataloging every escape route, every contingency, every obstacle. The manor itself seemed to lean into his plan, every groan of timber, every shiver of wind conspiring with him. He paused before a locked door, recalling the screams it had once muffled, the cruelty it had hidden. Now, it would be a stage for retribution, a portal through which fire and justice would pass. Samuel's hands lingered over the doorknob, feeling the warmth of anticipation radiate through metal. In the silence, he could hear centuries of oppression crying out, each voice lending strength to his resolve. Tonight, the house would witness the transformation of suffering into legend. Every step, every shadow, every whispered memory led him inexorably toward the moment when darkness would ignite into an unrelenting blaze. And as the candlelight flickered like a heartbeat, Samuel's own pulse aligned with it, steady, deliberate, and ready to strike. The final preparations required precision and patience. Samuel moved through the study, arranging oil-soaked rags along predictable paths, ensuring the fire would spread with both speed and inevitability. The candles, each carefully angled, caught every reflective surface, magnifying the impending chaos. He paused at the threshold of the master's bedroom, inhaling the scent of wax and timber, imagining the sudden terror in Blackthorn's eyes. Every detail mattered: the placement of draperies, the subtle airflow that would carry flames, the alignment of the chandeliers to catch sparks and scatter them like embers of retribution. Samuel's hands trembled only slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of history pressing upon him. For decades, he had been invisible, a shadow in the halls of tyranny, a vessel of unacknowledged suffering. Tonight, he would no longer be invisible. His act would echo across time. The manor itself seemed to acknowledge him, each creak of wood a whisper of anticipation, each flutter of curtain a signal of readiness. Samuel paused one last time, memorizing the pattern of the night, visualizing the fire's path, feeling the pulse of inevitability. He whispered a silent vow. Every scream, every flicker of flame, every collapsing beam would be testament to centuries of oppression finally answering with fury. His heart matched the rhythm of destiny, each beat a drum heralding the coming inferno. And as he positioned the final candle, he felt the weight of the world shift. The moment was near. The darkness was his ally, the shadows his witnesses, and the flames would carry the tale of vengeance into eternity. Tonight, Samuel would ignite history itself. The manor was unnaturally still, a cathedral of anticipation poised on the edge of revelation. Samuel moved silently through its vast halls, his presence barely a ripple in the thick air. Candlelight quivered in its holders, flames bending as if sensing the weight of what was about to unfold. Brass mirrors and crystal ornaments trembled with fractured reflections, their surfaces alive with shuddering light. Shadows sprawled across the walls, long and grasping, like skeletal fingers of premonition reaching to touch the moment of reckoning. Somewhere deeper within, Blackthorn's voice drifted, a low hum, steady and oblivious. It was the rhythm of authority, a tune once laced with power and fear, the sound of a man who believed himself untouchable. But Samuel's mind moved to a different cadence, the pulse of justice, sharp and inexorable, a drumbeat that resonated in his very bones. Every creak of timber, every flicker of flame, every whisper of air across stone became a signal. They marked the measured advance of a plan forged from decades of silence and endurance. Samuel's fingers struck the first match. Its flame was small, almost fragile, but in its light burned a lifetime of lash scars, humiliation, and relentless patience. The tiny spark kissed the oil-soaked rag, and instantly the fire came alive, flickering with hunger, eager to claim its inheritance of cruelty. Flames licked eagerly along the corridors, devouring tapestries woven with emblems of pride, catching on furniture polished by servitude, leaping from shadow to shadow until the hall became a living instrument of judgment. The crackle was no mere noise. It was a drumbeat of retribution, echoing Samuel's heartbeat, aligning with his resolve. He moved low and deliberate, his silhouette slipping between firelight and shadow, guiding the inferno along the routes he had mapped with precision. Each door he passed became a frame for the chaos, a stage where fire danced against the gilded symbols of tyranny. At the stairwell, Samuel paused. Smoke curled and twisted upward, a gray serpent ascending to the heavens. Heat pressed against his skin, the pungent scent of burning wood filling his lungs, grounding him in the reality of vengeance fulfilled. Then it came. The first startled shout, jagged and panicked, breaking the silence. To Samuel, it was music, a herald of inevitability. He advanced with steady purpose, each step part of the choreography of wrath. Shadows bent toward him, welcoming their arbiter, and though fire raged around him, Samuel's focus never wavered. His eyes sought only the moment when arrogance would finally meet flame, when Blackthorn would stand face to face with the justice he had long evaded, and history itself would tilt toward legend. The flames now roared with unrestrained hunger, racing through the Manor's vast halls as though eager to erase every trace of the cruelty once housed within. Velvet drapes disintegrated into floating embers, polished wood splintered into shrieking sparks, and gilded ornaments, symbols of wealth and arrogance, melted into molten ruin. What had once been a palace of dominance became a living pyre of justice, each flame a verdict against the sins of its master. Smoke thickened and curled through the corridors, clinging to every carved banister and archway, twisting around Samuel's body like specters bowing in deference to his long-awaited vengeance. Blackthorn's screams finally cut through the infernal chorus, sharp, desperate, and riddled with disbelief. The sound carried the weight of a man who could not fathom that his reign had ended, that his cruelty had been answered not with submission, but with fire. Samuel, unmoved by the cries, advanced with deliberate grace, his body steady though the air quaked with heat. He was no wild flame himself, but its architect, guiding the blaze along paths he had chosen, ensuring that every corridor, every chamber, became part of a carefully orchestrated symphony of retribution. The Manor's grotesque opulence revealed itself in the firelight, silk, crystal, and gold transformed into gaudy mockeries of power now reduced to ash. Samuel heard the frantic scramble of footsteps, the clattering of overturned objects, the desperate collision of Blackthorn against his own collapsing empire. Yet Samuel remained as shadow and steel, unstoppable, composed, every movement echoing the rhythm of his heart, which beat in time with the fire's roar, liberation, reckoning, transcendence. Memories surged with each breath of smoke, the lashes across his back, the endless nights of servitude, the humiliation endured in silence. Each ember symbolized not only his suffering, but its transformation into strength, into power reclaimed. At the grand stairwell, he saw him at last, Blackthorn, stumbling and coughing, disoriented and consumed by panic, trapped within the very inferno he once commanded over others. Samuel paused, not in hesitation, but in intention, allowing the master to feel the full magnitude of his undoing, the inevitability of justice come at last. The fire and candlelight fused into chaotic brilliance, reflections multiplying in mirrors and shattered crystal, as though the Manor itself bore witness to its fall. Samuel inhaled deeply, the acrid scent of burning oil and timber searing into his lungs, grounding him in the reality of triumph. The house groaned like a dying beast, its collapse a song of liberation. And in that crescendo, Samuel ceased to be merely a man. He became legend incarnate, vengeance made flesh, the harbinger of a story that would echo far beyond these merciless corridors. In the heart of this inferno, as the Manor groaned and smoke writhed like living shadows, pause for a moment with Samuel, witness to the culmination of silence turned wrath. Feel the heat not merely on the skin, but searing the soul, the weight of years pressed into every flicker of flame. Here, in this crucible of justice, we see what patience and endurance can forge, an ember of rebellion, a blaze of legend. Let your own eyes linger on the firelight dancing across shattered portraits and scorched marble, for every detail whispers a story of resilience, of vengeance earned and history rewritten. If the tremor of this tale moves you, if the ember sparks within your heart, do not let it fade into the shadows. Subscribe, share, and comment, becoming part of the narrative itself, a witness to legend in the making. For in acknowledging the tale, in joining this mythic moment, you honor those who rise from oppression, whose fury becomes eternal, and whose deeds echo beyond the corridors of time. Smoke thickened as the inferno spread, curling into the corners of the manor like serpents of judgment, slithering through every corridor and chamber where cruelty had once reigned unchecked. Samuel moved steadily through the flames, his steps measured and deliberate, each footfall echoing like the toll of a bell announcing vengeance fulfilled. The crackle of fire beneath his hands and feet was no longer just destruction. It had become a rhythm, a grim harmony that aligned with the steady thrum of his heartbeat, the pulse of a man who had waited years for this singular reckoning. Blackthorn's frantic cries, once commanding and cruel, now broke apart into strangled screams and desperate gasps, his authority dissolving into ash and smoke. Each sound grew weaker, swallowed by the very inferno he himself had nurtured through endless acts of violence. The manor seemed to awaken in its death. Timbers groaned and shrieked, chandeliers dripped molten crystal, and the walls themselves trembled as if acknowledging the fall of the tyrant who had long claimed dominion within them. Samuel's eyes, sharpened and glinting in the firelight, traced every path of destruction, cataloging the fall of each emblem of power. Gilded portraits, carved banisters, velvet curtains, all reduced to smoldering ruin. Shadows writhed in the blaze, twisting into grotesque echoes of torment past, the very architecture reflecting back the weight of the suffering it had once contained. Every door he passed stood as a silent witness, recalling memories of lashes, jeers, and chains, the relentless weight of oppression that had carved scars into his flesh and soul. Now, those same doors yielded to fire, transformed into glowing altars of his wrath. Yet even in the heart of triumph, Samuel remained deliberate, almost reverent. He did not surrender himself to frenzy, but moved as though participating in a ritual. Aware that vengeance was more than destruction, it was narrative, a story carefully written with fire and silence, one that demanded respect. The manor burned, collapsing into itself, but within that collapse a legend was born. Samuel emerged not as a reveler, but as a quiet arbiter, his presence ensuring the flames consumed only what deserved annihilation. From the smoke rose not just ruin, but the figure of a man transfigured into myth, endurance and fury sharpened into a righteous, unstoppable force. As dawn threatened the horizon, the first muted hues of orange bled into the ruins, seeping through shattered windows where glass once glittered with wealth and excess. The soft light mingled with the last stubborn embers of the fire, casting the grand hall in a surreal glow, half destruction, half rebirth. Samuel paused upon the fractured stairwell, his figure poised against the devastation below. From the ruin rose smoke in slow, twisting spirals, climbing into the sky like ethereal columns, as though the very air sought to carry his name upward, to etch it into the heavens as a permanent testament to what had been done. In the midst of this ruin lay Blackthorn, no longer the embodiment of dominance, but a broken husk of desperation, his charred skin and crawling form, an image of power unmasked, stripped of the opulence that had concealed its cruelty. Samuel's hands bore no stains of soot, for they were not the hands of chaos, but of deliberate purpose. His vengeance had been shaped, not in rage's blindness, but in the long patience of suffering endured. Each step he took away from the inferno became more than a movement of flesh. It became a symbolic imprint, a mark pressed upon memory and myth, translating his personal justice into a story that would ripple outward across generations. From hidden alcoves, trembling servants began to emerge, eyes wide with disbelief, hearts pounding with the recognition of change. They saw not merely the collapse of their master, but the birth of a new order forged in fire and silence, an unspoken promise that tyranny, no matter how immovable it seemed, could be undone. The manor, once a gilded prison of anguish, now spoke differently. Its walls, scarred and blackened, whispered not of oppression, but of liberation, hard won. Samuel's silhouette, framed by the fading flames and the first rays of dawn, became an emblem of patience fulfilled, of suffering that had not destroyed but transformed. There was no triumphant chorus, no revelry. Instead, a solemn stillness hung in the air, a reverence for justice executed with precision, for a life reclaimed through relentless will. The legend of that night would take root in murmurs and songs, carried on lips for generations. It would stand as both a hymn to endurance and a caution to oppressors, the memory of fire forever entwined with the echo of liberation. Samuel walked beyond the shattered halls, each step carrying him further from the blackened bones of the manor and the cruel history it had harbored. Behind him lay the charred echoes of a tyrant's reign, reduced to ruin and smoke. A place once oppressive, now stripped of its authority by flame. The early light of dawn broke across his figure, framing him not merely as a man departing destruction, but as a silhouette already being reshaped by memory into something larger, something enduring. In flesh he was scarred, weary, and human, but in memory he was already ascending into legend. The world itself seemed to hold its breath in that fragile silence, as though pausing to bear witness to the birth of a story that would outlast stone and flesh alike. Above him, birds circled in slow arcs, their cries piercing the morning air, mingling with the faint crackle of dying embers. It was as if nature itself composed a requiem, a rough yet reverent symphony for a life reclaimed from bondage. Samuel's heart was not ruled by blind malice. His fury was no wild tempest. It had been deliberate, sharpened by patience, and transmuted into something greater than revenge. Justice rendered precise, a narrative crafted rather than chaos unleashed. Each scar etched across his body, each memory of lash and chain, became more than reminders of suffering. They formed the foundation stones of myth, transforming his pain into a story that would be carried forward long after his footsteps faded. In towns and villages far beyond the ruined estate, travelers and locals alike would speak in hushed tones of the night when cruelty was consumed by fire. They described a figure who rose from ashes to defy not just a single oppressor, but the very essence of tyranny. Blackthorn's name, once synonymous with fear, began to dissolve, replaced by the enduring shadow of Samuel, a man whose patience became rats, whose silence became fire, whose suffering became legend. His tale no longer belonged to him alone. It lived in whispers exchanged in markets, in songs sung at quiet hearths, in fearful admiration and trembling awe. He had become an archetype, the oppressed who rose, the flame that consumed, the balance restored. His story was both warning and inspiration, a reminder that vengeance need not be reckless, that suffering, endured with resolve, could forge timeless strength. Once invisible, Samuel now cast a shadow eternal, the living myth born of fire, retribution, and unyielding endurance. News spread slowly, but with an inevitability that no wall or decree could contain. It moved first in whispers carried by those who had hidden in shadows that night, hearts pounding as they witnessed fire undo a lifetime of cruelty. Then it traveled farther, borne on the tongues of weary travelers, merchants, and wandering storytellers who passed through towns and villages, leaving behind murmurs that ignited imaginations. The tale was no longer just about a manor engulfed in flames. It was about a reckoning, a night when cruelty met its end at the hands of a servant who refused to bow any longer. Samuel, once unseen and unremarkable, became something larger than flesh and bone. In marketplaces, over mugs in dimly lit inns, and by hearths where families gathered, his name was spoken with a reverence that belonged less to a man and more to a myth. Those who had long endured the yoke of tyranny felt the first pulse of hope stir within them, a reminder that even the lowest could defy the highest when patience ripened into courage. The powerful, meanwhile, shifted uneasily, for the tale haunted them with its lesson, that silence could be dangerous, that those who bore cruelty without protest might one day transform that endurance into relentless justice. The ruined manor itself became a monument, its charred beams and crumbling walls testifying to the heavy cost of arrogance. People came to look upon it as though it were a shrine, proof that cruelty could collapse, that fire could purify. Samuel moved in the aftermath like a phantom. He kept to the shadows, unseen but never absent, knowing that legends did not grow through presence alone, but through distance, silence, and the imagination of others. Each retelling embroidered the night with more vivid detail. The flicker of candlelight along darkened corridors, the roar of flames devouring stone, the lone silhouette standing, unyielding against destruction. Blackthorn's name, once spoken with dread, fell into a whisper of warning, while Samuel's became an emblem etched in patience, wrath, and transformation. He bore his history not as shame, but as sacred duty, understanding that his legacy was no longer his own. What the world remembered was not destruction, but revelation. That power built on cruelty was brittle, and that endurance, cunning, and quiet resolve could shape inevitability. Samuel's name was now immortal, carried on the lips of both the fearful and the inspired, a tremor against every hand raised in oppression. The ruins of the manor lay quiet beneath the rising sun, its fractured walls still smoldering, smoke curling upward in slow, reluctant spirals that crowned the wreckage with a grim halo of ash. The once grand estate, a monument to arrogance and oppression, now stood as a skeleton of itself, stripped of grandeur and reduced to rubble. Samuel stood upon the hill that overlooked the devastation, his figure silhouetted against the pale light of dawn, his gaze steady and unflinching. What he saw was more than stone and timber undone. It was the unraveling of an empire built on cruelty, the collapse of a dominion that had thrived on the broken backs of the powerless. His shadow stretched long across the grass, merging with memory and myth, a reminder that the fire he set had not merely consumed a tyrant's home, but had ignited a tale destined to endure far beyond this moment. The wind carried with it faint echoes, whispers that wove themselves into the air like fragments of forgotten songs, scattered prayers, and fearful retellings murmured by trembling lips. Samuel listened, though no words were distinct, for he understood their essence. The legend had already broken free of his grasp, moving beyond him, slipping into the minds and hearts of strangers who would never know his face, yet would breathe his story as if it were their own. There was no jubilant celebration in the stillness, no cries of victory or triumph, only a deep reverence for the precision of vengeance delivered with patience, for the careful transformation of torment into something eternal. Every broken lock, every scorched beam of wood, every candle-lit corridor once haunted by fear had now been immortalized in memory. Witnesses, shaken, wide-eyed, and trembling, would carry the tale outward, and in their retelling, Samuel's presence would grow larger than life, a mythic certainty rather than a fleeting man. He had proven that endurance could shape the extraordinary, that even a soul scarred by cruelty and bent beneath chains could rise to become the vessel of an eternal story. Though Samuel himself would fade, swallowed by obscurity, the ember of his deeds would glow unquenched in the collective memory. The slave who once bore lashes now existed as legend, a figure whose wrath was righteous, whose silence cut deeper than words, and whose courage had shown that no cruelty, however monstrous, could remain unchallenged. The candlelit halls were gone, reduced to ash, but the story burned brighter still, unyielding, immortal, eternal.